An emergency situation is unfolding in the center of Moscow. The Cathedral of Christ the Savior is on fire. A column of smoke can be seen for kilometers. Nearby, the elite Ledom complex is engulfed in flames. Workers are trapped at a height. Firefighters are unable to break through inside. Amid the chaos, news strikes on Russian infrastructure. Oriel is once again in blackout.
All right. All right.
Strikes on Voronezh.
A drone flew over us. Look. Well, that really flew off.
The Senkum military plant in the Kursk region is on fire after a drone attack. And at the same time, a total blackout in Donetsk and the occupied region.
In short, charge your phones. Looks like they've decided to cut our power everywhere. At least for me. The neighbors, let's call them that, had their backup generator automatically activate. So fortunately, at least there's emergency lighting in the building.
The Chaikina substation has been blown up. There are fires and darkness everywhere. It's November 17th and Moscow is gripped by panic. The Cathedral of Christ the Savior is ablaze right in the center of the capital. Thick smoke is covering it and the surrounding area. A few hundred meters away, the luxury unfinished Ledom building caught fire. Apartments there cost millions of dollars, but right now the elite are saving themselves however they can, trapped by fire in their units. On the upper floors. Meanwhile, region after region, Russian infrastructure is collapsing.
Oriel, a city in Russia,
is once again left without power. A strike on the battered thermal power plant. In the Kursk region, the crucial Zinkum plant, which serves the military sector, is on fire. And the biggest news, a total blackout in Donetsk.
In short, please make sure to charge your phones now, as it really looks like they've decided to cut our power everywhere.
The Chaikina substation has been blown up, and Makeivka, Yasinovataya, and Gorlovka are also plunged into darkness. We attacked the Vishkema thermal power plant. We're getting closer to Moscow so that it will be left without electricity, heat, and water. Russia is entering the night in flames and chaos. Let's discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan.
Greetings, I wish everyone good health.
Roman Lvovich, you wanted the Rubliovka bathhouses to catch fire. Well, the so-called Rubliovka bathhouses did catch fire this weekend. There was a fire in the Moscow region at some bathhouses which led to a massive evacuation. That was the first celebration. And the second celebration was the Cathedral of Christ the Savior shrouded in smoke. So, it's burning next to it. As I understand, the elite residential complex Novostroy caught fire there. Workers are trapped there. It's a large-scale fire. As I understand, they tried to put it out but couldn't. The information is still being updated, but this is the work of concerned citizens, wouldn't you say? Because first it was the bathhouses, and now it's the Cathedral of Christ the Savior and the elite luxury Novostroy in the center of Moscow.
If it's a new building, then most likely the Tajiks are the ones who care. They're the ones mostly building everything there, and knowing how Russians treat them, of course, they set the place on fire. There are plenty of arsonists there. That's if it's next to the church, but the bathhouse, that's sacred. Most likely some escort girls weren't paid, and they realized they could become our concerned citizens. In Russia, in the area around the Russian capital, they did the same thing with the arsonists. That is, they set it on fire as well. Well, that's obvious. It's irony on one hand, but on the other hand, the more that burns in Moscow, the better. For us, that's definitely better because we need to cut off this Russian capital to completely remove it from national governance. Everyone understands this perfectly well, even in Russia itself. This is a metropolis that at one time, over the course of hundreds of years, It amassed wealth for itself and put many territories under practically slave-like conditions. And now there is an opportunity, a great opportunity, to put an end to this metropolis and finally regain the independence that was there originally. The same goes for Bashkortostan, Tatarstan, and so on. In all countries, including, by the way, even Tajikistan. Why do I say that the attitude toward Muscovites is so negative? And there are plenty of people who feel strongly about this all across Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and so on.
Yes, we sincerely wish for the Rublyovka bathhouses, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, and all other sites in Moscow to burn. Roman Lvovich, could these be hypothetical acts of sabotage, or is it just, pardon me, plain old carelessness, as often happens in Russia?
If the stars are being lit, it means someone needs it, right? If something is burning in Moscow, then someone definitely needs it too. Take 3 guesses who that might be. To the people, to the resistance forces who are trying to break free from Moscow's control. At least from our point of view, this is a positive development, and it definitely needs to be supported.
Friends, let us know in the comments what you think about the footage of the big fire and smoke near the Cathedral of Christ the Savior at that luxury construction site. Basically, I wish that Muscovites weren't eating lobsters with hazel grouse and expensive oysters, but were constantly in the fire, in the fire, in the fire. Roman Igorovich, another blackout in Oriel. The not yet destroyed Oriel CHP plant once again met some good Ukrainian drones today. What do you think of our strikes there? Well,
our missiles can reach Oriel. So in principle, Neptunes could have gotten there as well. That is, right now we have 3 types of Neptunes. The standard Neptune with a range of 280 to 300 kilometers. There's the so-called extended version, meaning with a longer range. We saw it with auxiliary fuel tanks near the center of mass, that is at the aerodynamic focus of the missile. That can reach up to 400 kilometers, so they can easily reach Oriel. Well, there's already a long-range missile, the so-called Neptune, which was used against Novorossiysk, and that's over 700 kilometers. That was a good job. So I think that besides drones, Neptunes are also being used. We have a good design bureau, the so-called State Enterprise Luch Design Bureau, which produces the Neptunes. Now they've ramped up production, put everything into mass production, so we can already talk about serial production, and the missile is performing well. That's the missile we should have been betting on back when we had the chance. That was before Russia's large-scale offensive operation began instead of cutting missile programs. In other words, it's a good missile that has proven itself well. Oriol itself, especially the Oriol thermal power plant, is one of the so-called maneuverable balancing power capacities in one of the southern technological corridors of Moscow. This is actually a continuation of the operation to deprive Moscow of electricity, so to speak. That is the destruction of these technological corridors around the perimeter of Moscow. Perhaps since we can't actually enter Moscow itself, our cruise missiles and drones can't break through Moscow's air defense systems. And instead of ballistic missiles, we've just been watching videos and listening to announcements for several years now, at the very least. That's why you can only cut off electricity to Moscow by destroying things in a wide circle along the perimeter, somewhere from 100 to 300 to 400 kilometers out. These technological corridors, which include not only thermal power plants like in Oriel, but also substations of 500 to 700 kilowatts, and so on around the circle. In other words, several such strikes have already taken place. And right now there is an attempt to cut off Moscow by destroying these technological corridors.
Roman Igorovich, there was also a successful attack in the Kursk region. The T-Synkum plant in the Kursk region was attacked and a large-scale fire broke out at the facility. The plant supplied materials for Russia's military sector. As I understand it, this is the first time we've attacked it. The floor is yours.
It's possible to reach Kursk. It's only about 80 kilometers away, I think. The same missiles could have been used there, including, of course, drones. This plant has long been under observation by our missile forces, which are capable of carrying out such a mission, most likely with the support of unmanned systems and special operations forces. Our special services finally reached it and struck because it was protected by Russian air defense. There's quite serious air defense there. It's basically frontline air defense with a range of about 180 kilometers. It's frontline air defense, but it can be breached. So we accomplished this mission. The military plant there was specifically working for the Russian military, and it's still burning to this moment. In other words, they did a pretty good job there. Well, thanks to its proximity. It's not far from our border.
Almost the entire occupied part of Donetsk region was left without power after a massive drone attack. Spectacular footage will definitely show it, definitely. So basically, Donetsk is completely without power there, a total blackout. They're all reporting it, complaining. Local public pages reported that after this, the entire occupied territory of the region lost power, and there were disruptions with mobile internet and communications. There is currently no electricity in Donetsk, Makiivka, Horlivka, or Yenakiv. It was written in the synth analytics that the Chaikina electrical substation in Makiivka was hit. Roman Lvovich, the floor is yours.
Donetsk, Russia, is currently being used as an important military hub, which supplies the rear of the so-called Russian group of forces who are presently attempting to capture the city of Pokrovsk. For us, it was important from the perspective of disrupting logistics and destroying this military hub, specifically from a military standpoint, to also destroy power generation and energy supply are important aspects of modern infrastructure. One of the options that was considered was to reach this Chaikinskaya substation. This substation has a capacity of 330 kilowatts, and it is powered by two separate thermal power plants, the Starobeshevskaya TPP and the Zuyevskaya GRES, which is also known as Zugres 2. These facilities work together to provide a stable and reliable supply of electricity to the region. So a strike on this substation, which cut off the reception of electricity, immediately shut down the Starobeshevskaya thermal power plant and reduced generation at the Zuyevskaya plant. Naturally, with GRES 2, the transfer of electricity to both Gorlovka and Yenakievo also stopped. So this is the general direction, specifically as a result of actions taken against this particular substation. It's clear that it supplied power to Makiivka, Yasinovataya, and also Donetsk. That's why Yenakievo, Gorlovka, Yasinovataya, Donetsk, and Makiivka were left without electricity for a while until Gorlovka and Yenakievo were reconnected. Now they are trying to reconnect Donetsk and Makiivka. I think we need to keep working in this direction. Why? Because over the past more than 10 years, the Russians have pushed Ukrainians out of Donetsk. They've practically forced them out. Those who haven't been forced out are scattered in basements and isolation wards. Ukrainians have practically left Donetsk, and the Russians have stuffed Donetsk with all sorts of riffraff from beyond the Urals. So now Donetsk is basically a city that the Russians use for these kinds of settlers, so-called resettlers, just like Mariupol. For us, it's also important to use various mechanisms, including this one, to push these Russians out of my Donbass. One of the mechanisms is simply to cut them off from electricity. As for water, they cut themselves off. That's the Russians for you. They were sawing off the branch they were sitting on, and in the end, they destroyed the water pipeline that supplied water to Donetsk. So electricity is all that's left, and honestly, it's going to smell pretty bad there for a long time. But I think a couple of our good storms will wash it out. In other words, it'll take a long time to clean up after this Russian rabble. Well, this is one of the mechanisms for pushing this Russian riffraff out of Donetsk, Makiivka, and Mariupol, with methods like these.
Dear audience, please like this video and share your impressions in the comments about how Moscow is burning, the luxury elite buildings, the churches, and of course how Russia is being disconnected from the thermal power plants. Blackout, no communication, no YouTube, no internet. In short, freeze, wolf's tail. Roman Nikolaevich, we are attacking again, this time another electrical substation, Vishkema, located in the district center of Ulyanovsk region, Russia. It is reported to be 900 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Do you see any strategy or tactics in our strikes on thermal power plants in Russia at this point?
This is when we started hitting a wide range of targets. And the same goes for the tests in Kursk and Oral. These strikes on substations, these are 500 to 750 kilowatt substations that are powered by those 8 technological corridors I mentioned, which supply electricity to Moscow. So this is a continuation of operations around the perimeter of Moscow. Since we can't get into Moscow itself, there's no ballistic capability. But these green little monsters are telling fairy tales about ballistic missiles, when in reality there probably aren't any and won't be. Why? Because some of those little monsters actually live in Moscow. So basically they won't strike their own, because most likely our hands are simply tied on this issue. Our counterintelligence still needs to work on this in action. That's the bare minimum. Right now, this is pure sabotage, because a country with missiles can't even launch a short-range missile 500 kilometers to Moscow. They've already made it 300 times. And since there are no ballistic missiles aimed at Moscow, it means we'll have to cut it off along the perimeter. One of the options is to take out the thermal power plants with maneuvering capacity, so-called balancing capacity, and of course the substations that transfer 500 kilowatts and above to Moscow and the Moscow region. We also shouldn't forget about the gas pipelines, the gas transfer pipes, because there are several dozen gas generators in Moscow. So even if you take out all the substations and bring down all the power lines around Moscow, they will still be able to generate enough electricity using gas to at least supply the main consumers in emergency mode. That's why it's important to also take out those gas pipelines. Well, the optimal solution, of course, would be to take down the Yamal Cross. But you have to get there. It's 3,000 kilometers away.
Roman Igorovich, let's move on to the situation at the front, because unfortunately, it's been reported that in Zaporizhzhia, the enemy has managed to gain a foothold in 3 settlements and our armed forces have withdrawn. How do you assess the current situation?
Most likely, there was a backroom deal in 2022, maybe even earlier somewhere in Oman, to give up Donbas, Crimea, and the land corridor. I don't see any other explanation here. If you trace the chain of cause and effect, what's happening now is the surrender of Donbas, the surrender of the land corridor on the left bank of the Zaporizhzhia region. We had a good position there. And in Pokrovsk, we had a good position. And in the Huliapol area, the position was excellent. But through certain actions, or rather, I would say inactions of our green authorities who didn't bring things up to standard, how long have we been talking about this? For half a year, we've been saying that we need to line up the security forces, take the armor off law enforcement and civil servants, and form ranks to reinforce those corps that were properly created at the time. Now they've created these corps, but they're left without professionals. They tried to gather up the collective farmers. It's like they created a collective farm, so let's get some collective farmers. They tried to gather collective farmers, but collective farmers can't fight, at least not right away. They're not trained for it. They call them busy fight, as they say. And even then, they didn't get as many as they needed. Of course, who would go if they don't know how to do the job? And those who do know how to do it hid behind armor. Hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officers hid behind armor, and there are 10. They sent off about 10% just to get rid of them, as they say. 90% will get caught in the rear of a country at war, and they need to be put to work. And since this wasn't done, it means a technical surrender of this direction. Crimea, Donbas. And it's obvious even to the untrained eye when you can, but you don't. As we once discussed, if a person wants to but can't, that's impotence. If he can but doesn't want to, that's a female of a male dog, to put it mildly. Here it's the same kind of green female dogs who didn't set up a proper security force. Right now we're losing ground on the Zaporizhzhia front. There's no catastrophe there yet, of course, but the Russians have already approached Huliapol from the north and east, and Huliapol is one of the strongholds in that direction. If we withdraw from Huliapol, the Russians will continue advancing towards Zaporizhzhia, trying to encircle it, and will also attempt to surround the Orikhiv garrison. If we lose the Huliapol garrison, we'll lose the Orikhiv garrison as well. They'll reach Zaporizhzhia, start hitting Zaporizhzhia with army artillery, and we'll lose Zaporizhzhia. We'll lose it completely. It's ours on the left bank. Kherson is still somewhat protected by the river. But most of Zaporizhzhia is on the left bank, especially our technological giants, those massive Zaporizhzhia factories and metallurgical plants, and so on and so forth. Roman
Yakovlevich, here's the latest information from Deep State. The occupiers have advanced in the Huliapol direction near Ravnopolye and Novouspensskoye. The occupiers have also made gains near Yampol and Novomarkovskoye in Donetsk, not to be confused with Donetsk region.
Well, Yampol is near Lyman, so we have a big problem there, of course. The Russians are trying to move from Yampol, pushing further toward Lyman in order to approach Sloviansk from the north. So this direction is also problematic. And as for Zaporizhzhia, at the moment we have 2 such critical areas, Pokrovska and Zaporizhka. But basically it's one area. As we discussed before, one of the Russians' objectives will be to move along the Huliapol-Pokrovsk line. And that's exactly where they're advancing. So that line should have been reinforced in due time. But reinforced with what? Like I said, we should have deployed a line of security forces, not just tried to catch them. So what ends up happening is our security forces are busy catching farmers, doing what they usually do, as they say. Instead, they should have sent those farmers to the troops, where the security forces themselves should be stationed.
Roman Yakovlevich, now, of course, an important topic, the meeting between the leaders of France and Ukraine. Ukraine has reached an agreement with France to purchase 100 Rafale fighter jets. I'm interested in your opinion. When will they arrive? When will we see them in the Ukrainian sky, defending our airspace? The floor is yours. Well,
that's exactly the question here. Right now, we have major problems in the east. Donbass is being surrendered, Zaporizhzhia is being surrendered through inaction. And in order to cover up this surrender, they're rushing around the world, trying to create, so to speak, a positive image for their face. Well, how else can you put it? There are problems right now. There will be problems tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, there will still be problems. When will the Rafales arrive? In 10 years. They were running around with the Gripens. When will the Gripens arrive? In 15 years. In 10 to 15 years. The most interesting thing is who doesn't need them. We need them now. And the issue needs to be resolved here and now. So right now, we shouldn't be worrying about the Rafales or the Gripens, but about the means of destruction that we need at this stage. We need missiles. We have Mirages and we need missiles. The Rafales won't be delivered tomorrow anyway. Even the Gripens, if we're talking about the Gripens, then in 10 to 15 years, 150 Gripens, but we need at least 4 Gripen aircraft right now so that we can use Meteor missiles with them, because the platform itself isn't as important. In other words, the aircraft itself isn't that important, because what's the point of having several dozen F-16S if we don't have JASSMs for them, if we don't have AIM-120D missiles for them, which could operate at ranges over 150 kilometers? What's the use of these planes? It's like fly swatters, as they say, against Russian Garans in the rear. Nothing more than that. So a slightly different approach is needed here. It's the means of destruction that hits the Russians, not the means of delivery. That's the main problem here. And quoting now, pay attention to the fact that someone went off to France to hang out, while at the same time, Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk, the Donetsk region, are being given up. Well, that's just a distraction, nothing more. Let me explain it once again, step by step. It needs to be done now. And right now, all these agreements need to be in place, with Macron as well. We need to request from him a sufficient number, for example, of those same HIMARS, which have proven themselves very well. An additional number right now, which could operate in the same area as Huliaipol, that is near Huliaipol. A HIMARS can reach there. So that's what Mirages are for, to launch them. And on our Su aircraft, MiGs are operating in some positions. That's the most important thing. At the moment, everything else is, let's put it this way, there's a good expressive Ukrainian word for it, but in Russian, it's like pulling the wool over people's eyes. And right now, this whole green crowd is just trying to fool Ukrainian society while blatantly, excuse my language, screwing up the Eastern Front. For now, I don't see any positive developments here.
Roman Grigorievich, what are the concrete results of this meeting? Let me briefly go over them now so you can comment. There's a scenario where Ukraine receives new aircraft directly from the manufacturer, but that will take time. We're talking about at least 3 years, Roman Grigorievich, from the signing of the agreement to the delivery of the fighter jets. The price of the new Rafale 4S as of 2024 has been set according to the contract between France and Serbia at $225 million per fighter jet. The signatories of the agreement must pay either with a reparation loan, funds from the EU Defense Fund, or with frozen assets of the Russian Federation. Roman Lvovich, well, 3 years.
In 3 years, Rashka will no longer exist. There will be no one left to fight. That's why I'm saying this is just eyewash. Let them look for glasses. It's better if they rub them into each other, or glasses, however it's supposed to be. Wherever the stress goes, they know better over there. What's the point of getting these Rafales in 3 years and Gripens in 15? The point is in them. Our main task right now is to stop the Eastern Front, which is collapsing, and to strike at the Russian economy, so that in 3 years we won't need Rafales. Over 200 million each. Let them fly them themselves. A plane should cost 50 or 60 million, not over 200. It's a good machine, no question about it. But we definitely won't have enough of them. And if we're going to get involved with someone or something, then it's better to work with the Swedes, specifically with the Gripens. That's if we're talking about the future. Again, what kind of future? What level of future are we talking about? We need it tomorrow. Right now, we have about 50 F-16S. But have you noticed that they're nowhere to be seen or heard? They have nothing to shoot with. Just so you understand the situation, there's nothing to launch, nothing to drop. So they just fly around the rear, shooting down Russian Gerans. That's it. All right, at least these cost a few tens of millions of dollars, more or less. But if they end up costing hundreds of millions, why would we need them? And believe me, in 10 years, manned aircraft and pilots won't be needed at all. Because in just 3 or 4 years, at the very least, drones will be taking to the skies, meaning aircraft, well, unmanned aircraft controlled entirely by artificial intelligence. Tasks will simply be assigned and they will carry them out on their own. Right now, if we're going to sign any long-term contracts with anyone, the best option is with the Turks for the same Kizilelma for the Milos project. But these guys are running around like fools with their outdated planes, talking about aircraft for 15 years from now. We need planes now. We actually have planes now, but they just don't have JASSM missiles on them. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's where the main problem lies. And right now, we need to focus on missiles. Which European missiles could be used? The same Taunt, the same Mica missile, the same Aster 30 missile for the SMT. That's what we need to focus on. At the moment, on the same French Hammer missile system, which can currently be used, if, for example, we have Taurus missiles and the same Orion missile, then we can use that missile as well. That's the Gripen. That's the optimal option, and it needs to happen now. The Gripens should be here tomorrow or the day after, at least within the next month, so that these missiles can be used to drive away Russian aviation and smash the Russian economy. That's what we need to focus on, not on Kazamilon in 3, 5, 10, or 15 years, something we definitely won't need. The only good thing is that no one is signing any agreements. That's just pulling the wool over our eyes. And again, it's about Kazamilon. Right now, they're trying to sign a so-called proposed agreement of some sort. In other words, it's not a real contract. It's a memorandum of understanding, as it's called, which doesn't obligate anyone to anything. Because buying Rafales for 220 million, I'll say it again, when Kaisers were flying them. Roman
Legoich, the pink flamingo rocket, for which the Czechs raised about $500,000 in just 2 days, was shown in photos by the Associated Press. The publication writes that representatives of the Weapons of Ukraine Initiative, Jan Polak and Martin Andarchik, hope that the rocket will fly to Moscow or St. Petersburg. We feel that they are fighting for us, they said. We are extremely grateful, but this is a good reason to talk about our own Flamingo missiles. Where are they? How many do we have? And when will mass production finally begin?
The pink flamingo, the child of kickbacks, as I understand it. That's probably where the song came from. With the flamingos, they flew off to warmer places. Where to? To Israel. Where else did they go? Where are our other flamingos? In Israel? And where else could they be? If they've already announced hundreds of missiles there, then half of Russia would have been burned down by now if they actually existed. So it's just more smoke and mirrors. They've just pulled the wool over her eyes, nothing more. Besides, the missile is simple. Back in the day, the Germans produced thousands, even tens of thousands of them almost 100 years ago. It's the V1. Back then, it cost between 3 and 10,000 Reichsmarks. That's roughly $10,000 to $40,000. But even if it cost 100,000 now, not 500,000 like they're trying to sell it to us for. So, of course, many thanks to our Czech friends who understand and are trying to take part in this process in some way. But now, all of this already causes a strong sense of aversion and even discomfort, especially after the Flamindici practically smeared and tainted this entire topic with what can only be described as Israeli manure. We understand this perfectly well. And now, all these flamingos, Flamindici and Firepoints, all these fiery show-offs are perceived entirely negatively. There are definitely problems. So yes, some of them will fly somewhere because a certain number of rockets are being produced, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7. But no more than that, because for now, these are still pre-production tests and prototypes, which might simply not reach their target since they are still far from being networked. And if this whole saga with the Flamindicis continues, then they won't go anywhere at all. So we understand perfectly well how this could end. It has already ended badly. Why? Because our partners have started to look askance at our executive branch, which should have been changed a long time ago. The entire cabinet of ministers needs to be dismissed. Right now, we need a government of public trust, one that will be coordinated with our partners. First of all, this government of public trust means that the people of Ukraine should nominate about 10 ministers whom they trust, and these should be agreed upon with our partners. They must inspire confidence in our partners, the ones providing the money, and not hand it over to the Flamindicis, into the hands of those representatives of the Ukrainian people who can be trusted to replace the executive branch. Until we do this, until we replace the entire cabinet of ministers, this whole Shmyhal team needs to be sent to the front so they can experience firsthand what they've been buying lately, what they've been supplying to Pokrovsk. So the entire Shmyhal team, the whole cabinet of ministers, the entire executive branch should be called up through the military enlistment office and sent to Pokrovsk. And let them fight with the equipment they've been purchasing, while we bring into the cabinet of ministers people who have the full trust of both the Ukrainian people and our partners. Is it possible to do this in 2 to 4 hours? The cabinet of ministers can be changed without political struggle within 24 hours. Why? Because we have a parliamentary presidential republic. We need to finally remember our constitution, a parliamentary presidential republic. Here, power belongs to the people, meaning the people hold the power, and the legislative power, that is the representatives of the people, is the Verkhovna Rada. That's why we need to put pressure on the Verkhovna Rada so that it expresses no confidence in the government and dismisses it completely. Naturally, they should be sent straight to the Territorial Recruitment Center, right from the Cabinet of Ministers directly to the TRC. There, the TRC officers should meet them at the exit, since they pushed through the very law they themselves promoted, the mobilization law, and send them off to Pokrovsk to help our guys hold the line at Pokrovsk, or to Huliaipol. They can choose. People should have a choice, so let them pick Pokrovsk or Huliaipol. And naturally, within those 24 hours, bring in new people. That opportunity exists. It was done in the summer as soon as they did it. Inside that Cabinet of Ministers brothel, they just changed the beds and the girls. They forgot to change the sheets. They stink. There are still problems with the sheets.
Ukraine will receive 8 SMT air defense systems, a total of 48 launchers. This is a historic deal for France. Undoubtedly, Paris is currently working on their modernization, Emmanuel Macron stated. I think we'll definitely discuss this next time. The well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Nikolaevich, thank you as always. See you this Wednesday. Friends, please like this video and write a few kind words in the comments to support Ukraine's armed forces.
Goodbye.